Hello everybody. Thought I would do another video since I've had a little more time to do videos lately due to random events happening. So I thought that I would do a video that I've been promising for a little while, which is talking about how to see a little bit of past life tonalities in a chart. Only I'm going to express this a little more fully through looking at the karmic implications in a chart. And I'm going to take this chart, which is the chart of Jimi Hendrix, which I've rectified the time of from a time that I found online. And I'm going to do a karmic implications analysis, a brief one, I should say. And this is something that I offer in my Tier 1 and Tier 2 services. If you like the approach that I give to this and you would like to have your astrology looked at in this particular manner, you can book a Tier 1 or Tier 2 consultation through my astrological services page. The link will either be on this side or that side on the page, or on the video, I should say. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this, and I'm going to kind of try to keep it brief, because otherwise I could go on for like 45 minutes or an hour, and I notice that people's attention spans with videos tends to be rather short sometimes. So I'm going to try to keep it in under a half hour. And I'll have to really restrain myself, because once I get going, I sometimes want to go to the nth degree. And I'm not going to make it too technical, but for those of you who like a little bit of the technical stuff, I'll make it a little bit technical. I should mention, first of all, that I tend to work with house cusps, in addition to using the equal house system. House cusps are specifically defined points in a chart that mark the more concrete manifestation of a particular house. One of the first things that I do in my karmic analysis is I look at the 12th cusp, because the 12th is going to give us an idea of what was coming to completion in a previous lifetime. The 12th also deals with the past, because it's the one that's right before the first, which is the current lifetime. So we can get an understanding of a previous lifetime just through that. So here we have a 12th cusp that is in Scorpio and is in Anuradha Nakshatra. And one of the things that I look at when I do this is something called the Shastyamsha deity. Now, in order to do this, you really need to have a rectified birth time, but I've rectified this birth time. So I feel like I can trust this particular house cusp. In my karmic analysis, in the consultations that I do where I don't have a rectified birth time, I just look at the 12th equal house, and I look at the Lord of that 12th, and I take the Shastyamsha deity for that. But since we have the 12th cusp, we can actually look at his Shastyamsha deity for that, which is Brashta, or fallen. Vicious is another word that's associated with this. But what you usually find with this particular placement is it's an individual who has had a high place or has been in a position of notoriety, and they experienced some difficulty, or they had a fall from grace. And it's interesting too, because in Hendrix's case, his sun is in Sagittarius. And if you look at that sun in Sagittarius, one of the associations with Sagittarius is a fall from high places. If you look at it from Jaimini astrology, Jaimini talks about Sagittarius being associated with falls from high places. Why? Because Capricorn is the natural 10th house of the zodiac. It's the point that's directly above at the time of an individual's birth. Sagittarius is the 12th from that. So it's a loss of a high place. So there's a lot of meaning that's there, and it kind of ties into the concept of Brashta. Now, interestingly enough, Mars is the Lord of that 12th cusp. And I'm going to move something out of the way just so I can show a few things to you, because we've already identified the house cusps there. And Mars is also the Lord of the 3rd and the 4th. All of this is important. And we can also see that in the Shastyamsha, Mars itself is in Libra with the 2nd and 6th cusps. Okay? All of that comes across as being very meaningful. But Mars is in Vishaka Nakshatra, whereas the Nakshatra Lord of the 12th cusp, which is Saturn, is the Lord of the 2nd right, in this particular chart. And rather than going into, you know, extreme depth, I'm going to give you a summary of some of the things that I found in association with this. Because basically, Vishaka Nakshatra gives an individual the capacity to achieve many and various fruits. So that would have made Hendrix very versatile in a previous lifetime. And because Vishaka is associated with both Indra and Agni, it tends to create individuals in terms of having planetary placements there that are very powerful. And if we look at that Saturn, which is the lord of Anuradha Nakshatra, which is where the 12th cusp is, that Saturn is in Rohini Nakshatra, which is noted for making individuals very creative because it's associated with Brahma, the creator. But in addition, Rohini Nakshatra, because individuals with a placement in this tend to be very productive, they tend to attract a lot of jealousy to them. Also, we can note that Rohini was the favorite wife of the moon, and all the other wives of the moon were a little bit jealous of Rohini, all of which kind of ties into creating an individual who likely would have attracted some jealousy to himself because of his power. Mars being in Libra, well, one of the things that's associated with that is the concept of justice or social justice, but he was also likely very skilled and refined, and we can't ignore the fact that Venus rules Libra as well in the Shastyamsha. So that's his creative skills that are there. And we can see that Mars rules the 3rd and the 4th, the 11th and the 12th. If we look at the nakshatras of all of those things, and I told you I'd go into it to the nth degree, we've got the 3rd cusp in Uttara Bhadrapada, we've got the 4th in Ashwini Nakshatra, we've got the 11th in Vishaka Nakshatra, and we've got the 12th, as we said, in Anuradha Nakshatra. So as we go a little more into depth with some of these things, like I said, we can see somebody who was powerful, somebody who potentially was working for humanity, was using his creative skills in a very zealous manner, a very passionate manner because of the 3rd house placement in Uttara Bhadrapada, and somebody who was very secure in trying to do the right thing. But we can see that he potentially attracted a lot of conflict to himself, right? So I'm going to try to keep it brief, like I said. I could go more into depth with this. So we can also see that his Atmakaraka, which is another factor I look at, that Atmakaraka is very strong because that moon is in its own house. It's a little bit hampered by the fact that it's in Bala Avasta, but that's not really going to hurt it very much. It's going to make that moon still a very strong planet. In addition to that, it's there with an exalted Jupiter, which makes it very powerful. And that moon is in Pusha Nakshatra. The Shastyamsha deity for the Atmakaraka is Kubera, or celestial treasurer. And with this particular position, usually the person is building upon wealth from a previous lifetime. So we see building upon his skills, building upon his actions in a previous lifetime, building upon the work that he did. And for those of you who don't know much about Jimi Hendrix, well, then you need to go read some books. I'm only kidding. For those of you who don't know much about Jimi Hendrix, he was a very powerful musician. He was a musician who, in terms of his creative expression, putting a spiritual message across and a message that was enlightening to the masses was more important to him than the amount of money that he was making. So he wanted to really build upon what he had been doing in a previous lifetime, which was sharing a social message through using his creative skills. And it's when we get into Ketu, it's going to turn out to be very interesting. So why don't we kind of go into that a little bit? So first of all, I just want to say everything that Ketu is associated with, and then we'll expand upon that. So we've got a Ketu that's in Aquarius, and it's in Shatabishak Nakshatra. It's conjunct the 2nd house cusp and the 3rd house. So the 3rd house is associated with expression. So that's just one particular association of the 3rd house. In addition to that, 3rd house placements with Ketu tend to make individuals who have a particular mindset or think that things are a particular way. Sometimes in their lifetimes, that come into being after what Ketu is representing, then they tend to have their faith tested. Ketu in Aquarius. Well, first of all, we're seeing that Ketu with the third and Ketu with the second. Ketu with the second would have made him a very resourceful individual. That second cusp is in Dhanishta Nakshatra. Dhanishta, you'll find a lot of musicians have a placement somewhere in Dhanishta Nakshatra. So we see that second cusp place there in Dhanishta Nakshatra. It's interesting though, because Hendrix was, were not a lot of friends for Hendrix who were his true friends. His true friends were few and far between. Other people were kind of hangers-on for him. So here we see friends who would have been musicians as well. We also see somebody who was in a position of notoriety and fame. But to Ketu in Aquarius, let's talk about that. Ketu in Aquarius tends to create previous lifetimes for individuals where the opinion of their peers means a lot to them. It's how they find security within the opinion of their peers. So then in this particular lifetime, it makes it so those individuals kind of just have to follow their own path, surely because it's their path and it feels right and it feels like a natural expression of who they are, and they need to get past the concept of validation. If you followed the life of Hendrix, he did actually get past that because he got to a point where he didn't really, it didn't matter to him what others thought about him. He just wanted to put his music out there. But he was somewhat isolated from friends and associates. There were not really people who were on the same par or on the same level as him because he was a pretty phenomenal musician. When we look at Ketu in Shatabishak Nakshatra, well, one association with that is Shatabishak Nakshatra tends to create people who are on a mission. So previous lifetime he was on a mission. He carries that on into this lifetime and he's still on a mission. And sometimes they don't like the mission that they're on because it puts them in a rather lonely place and they have to kind of resign themselves to the actions that they are here to do. It's likely when he did the work that he did that his life kind of came to a difficult head. It could have been that his life came to a violent end, and there's actually a short video that I saw of how Hendrix, somebody who spoke to Hendrix towards the end of his life, and Hendrix was talking about past life memories and remembering choking to death on something as if he was poisoned. So that could, and also we've got that Shatabishak association with Rahu, which kind of fits in with that equation, previous lifetimes, because Rahu has the association with poison, right? Shatabishak can be associated with that too. So there was the potential for that to happen. The Lord of Ketu is Saturn, and that Ketu is in the fifth from Ketu, and the seventh from the ascendant itself. When we look at that fifth cusp is in Bharani Nakshatra. The seventh is in Mrigashira Nakshatra. So basically, there could have been at some point in his life in a relationship with a child that went through some difficulty and there was some separation, and those two individuals might have come back together, him and his child, because Mrigashira tends to have a rehabilitative quality to it. So separation and then coming back together tends to happen a lot with Mrigashira Nakshatra. But we can also see an individual who was expressive, had something to express for the public, because that's the fifth and the seventh, so creatively expressive for the public, but it was something that brought a lot of pain to him, with that fifth being in Bharani, and Bharani is also associated with Yama, the god of death, so that's a hint that that may have actually brought his own demise. Let's shift on to Rahu, because like I said, I could just go on forever. So here we see a Rahu that's in Leo, and that Rahu is conjunct the 9th, and it's conjunct the 8th cusp. We've got an 8th cusp here that's in Ashlesha Nakshatra, and the 9th is in Hasta Nakshatra. One thing that will create is an individual who will struggle for their beliefs, an individual who can be very passionate for all things mystical. With this Rahu placement in Magha Nakshatra, there's going to be a connection with ancestors, and Hendrix had some ancestry that was also Native American, and he used to really connect with his Native American ancestry, something that a lot of people don't know about Jimi Hendrix, so that kind of fits in with the Magha placement. And we see a sun that's in the 5th from Rahu, and in the 1st from the ascendant, right? That 1st is in Mula Nakshatra. Mula Nakshatra makes people very passionate and very directed in a particular direction, but sometimes in a manner that brings a lot of hardship for them. And that definitely happened in Hendrix's case, because he signed a lot of contracts over the course of his life. And basically, even though he had enough, he didn't have as much money as a lot of people might have thought that he did have. And again, we see this 5th cusp association. But let's talk about Rahu in Leo for a moment. So this is going to put somebody who maybe on one level feels more comfortable with the appreciation of their peers and their group of peers. It's going to kind of put them in a position where they're all alone in a spotlight. They don't have people who are on the same level or the same par as them. And we can see that being confirmed through Ketu and Moon and Ketu Jupiter. Ketu Moon, with the Moon being a very sociable planet, the Moon can tend to create some separation or isolation from people based upon ideals. And so those individuals have to accept, or not all those individuals, in Hendrix's case, because of the placement of these 2 planets in Pusha Nakshatra, he likely had to accept some limitation wherein he was confronted with a lot of jealousy. And we see that coming out in his life. And he had to kind of put his emotions to one side just to kind of do what he was here to do. So Rahu and Leo would have made him all alone in the spotlight. And there tends to be something that plays out through the 2nd and 8th cusp axis with Ketu and Rahu, where individuals don't find themselves in a position where they're confronted with having to trust other people, but they don't really feel that they have the capacity to be able to trust those other people. So he was surrounded with a lot of people because of the Ketu 2nd and 3rd connection, meaning friends and associates, but many of which he couldn't trust or put his faith in or really believe in, as we see the 8th and the 9th connection. Equally, we can see that as he worked for his ideals and his beliefs, that he would have continued along the path of facing a little bit of hardship, and he did. He faced the hardship and the isolation. He had to find himself in a position of accepting a placement in the spotlight, even though he was a very humble individual. So he had to kind of, just put all the things that were beneath the surface, which were a very sensitive individual, and just get on with the job. And he had to use like a noble presence in order to do that. But the most interesting thing is this time around, it's not for the validation from others, even though that naturally happened in his life. Instead, it was because it was something that he actually believed in. And he was just expressing it because it felt right to express that in itself, just doing what was natural and doing what was right, his natural expression, regardless of what other people thought. So we can see that basically the sun, which rules Rahu, is in the 5th from Rahu. So that's his creative expression, kind of making a shift because of the 5th placement in Bharani from previous lifetimes, taking things up to the next level with his both his creativity and the work that he was doing for humanity through his creativity. Taking things up to the next level, but doing it just because it was what he was into doing. And when he was into doing it, he was passionately into doing it. Hendrix just played all the time. As a matter of fact, there's a song called Manic Depression that's about, the depression of recognizing that his music can't love him back. You know what I mean? And just wanting to really become one with the music that he was doing. And that's where he was in a previous lifetime too, because that 12th cusp is in Anuradha Nakshatra. We have to remember that. So it would have made him a very passionate individual and a very directed individual. And somebody who got to a point where he just said, you know what, the money, 2nd house, is not important to me. What's more important to me is that I am putting this spiritual message out. And, you know, the money, you can just do whatever you want to with it. And he kind of got to that point in his career. And a lot of people did do what they wanted to do with it, sadly enough. But, you know, he just reached a point where, you know, the message was more important. So we could see he successfully completed his nodal axis. He got to the point where it wasn't the validation of others that he cared about. Instead, it was sharing a message for humanity, which brings Ketu to completion. Because the, I would say the less noble quality of the Ketu in Aquarius position would be wanting the validation of others. The more noble quality of that would be completing the concept that Ketu really needs to recognize that they need to fulfill a purpose within their own particular dharma for the betterment of humanity. And that was a point that Hendrix definitely reached through his creativity. So this is just a brief assessment. I usually go a little more into depth with this, and I made it really fast for your sake so I could hopefully keep it short. But if you'd like to book a Tier 1 or Tier 2 consultation with me, please do note that there is a link at the bottom of the page where you can do so. That's going to do it, and thanks a lot for watching. Bye now.